My name is Louise Martinez, but my students always called me Mrs. Lou, and that is who I think of myself as, even now, 3 years into retirement. I was an elementary school counselor at Jefferson Elementary in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 30 years. If you have ever worked with young children in the counseling context, you understand what that means. You sit on tiny chairs. You keep boxes of tissues and small calm-down toys and picture books about feelings. You help 7-year-olds find language for things that full-grown adults struggle to name. I want to tell you about October 14th, 2022. But first I want to tell you a little about who I was going into that day. Because what happened during my near-death experience was a direct response to something I had been carrying for a long time without fully acknowledging it. I grew up in the Barelas neighborhood of Albuquerque. My parents, Miguel and Rosalinda Martinez, were both from families that had been in New Mexico for generations, long before it was New Mexico. We are not immigrants in the conventional sense. The border crossed us. My family has been in this particular piece of land since before the United States had a name for it. I became a school counselor because of a woman named Mrs. Patricia Baca, who was the counselor at my elementary school in the 1960s. She was the first adult outside my family who asked me what I was thinking and then waited for the actual answer. I have carried that experience my whole professional life, the specific power of being asked and waited for. I married a man named Robert Martinez in 1981. We had 3 children, Elena, Carlos, and little Nita, who is not so little anymore at 38. Robert died of a heart attack in 2015. He was 62 years old, and he was shoveling snow. We had an unusual snowstorm that January, and he died in our driveway on a Tuesday morning. I want to be honest about what Robert's death did to the framework I had spent my career building. I was a counselor. I knew about grief. I had walked children and their families through loss more times than I could count. And then it was my turn, and what I discovered was knowing the map does not make the terrain any less difficult. After Robert died, I began to struggle with a specific kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone. I had my children and grandchildren and a full life. But the loneliness of feeling invisible, of feeling that the things I did and the care I offered and the simple daily acts for people moved through the world without leaving a trace. That the connection I offered to children, to their parents, to the teachers I supported, vanished as soon as the session was over. I know that counselors are not supposed to need validation. We are trained out of it. But the loneliness was real, and I had not given it a name until I had time to sit with it after Robert was gone. On October 14th, 2022, I was driving home from my granddaughter Rosa's soccer game on I-40 westbound. It was 5:15 in the afternoon, the end of a perfect October day. The last thing I remember clearly is the radio. I was listening to an oldies station playing something by Linda Ronstadt, which seems fitting given the Southwest connection. And then there was a sound like the world ending, and everything went white. A truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel and crossed 3 lanes. The multi-vehicle accident involved 6 cars. I later learned that 3 people were hospitalized. I was the most seriously injured. My car was hit on the driver's side and I was ejected. I was not wearing my seatbelt because I had just unbuckled it to reach something in the back, which I will acknowledge was a foolish thing to do and which I have thought about every day since. I flatlined at the scene, 7 minutes and 3 seconds. What happened in those 7 minutes was a direct and specific answer to everything I had been carrying since Robert died. I want to share it with you, especially if you have ever felt invisible, especially if you have ever wondered whether the care you give leaves any trace at all. I was not afraid. I want to establish that first because it seems important. The impact was violent and I should have been terrified, but the fear did not travel with me. What traveled with me was something much quieter and much larger. I was in a space of light. Not a tunnel. Not a defined place with edges. More like being held inside something luminous and vast that was also somehow intimate. The way it feels to be held by someone who knows you completely and has no judgment about what they know. And then the life review began. I have read about life reviews in the context of near-death experiences. I knew the concept. What I could not have prepared for was the specific way it worked. Not as a series of scenes shown to me from outside, the way you watch a film, but as a complete, immersive re-experience of my entire life, and crucially, as an experience of my entire life from both sides. I need to explain what I mean by both sides. I lived my life from inside it. I experienced what I experienced. But the life review showed me my life from the perspective of everyone I had ever encountered. Not in a surveillance way, not intimate private moments that were not mine to see, but in the way of impact. I saw what my actions, my words, my simple presence had meant to other people. And I'm going to tell you what I found, because it directly addresses the loneliness I described. I will start with the smallest things, because the smallest things were the ones that surprised me most. In 1989, a second-grade girl named Jasmine came to my office because her teacher was worried about her. Jasmine was quiet and withdrawn, and her grades had slipped. I sat with Jasmine for 20 minutes, and I asked her what was going on at home, and she told me, in the way that 7-year-olds tell things, sideways, through another subject, that her parents were fighting, and she was afraid they were going to stop being a family. I said to Jasmine, "You are brave to tell me that." I said, "Your parents' problems are not your job to fix." I said, "You are safe in this room, and you can always come back here." I had completely forgotten that conversation. There were hundreds of similar moments in the review. Each one arrived with the same quality of revelation. Not information I was learning for the first time, but information I was seeing for the first time at full scale, without the obscuring noise of ordinary daily life. A parent I had met with in 2003, a father whose son was having trouble in 3rd grade, who sat in my office looking ashamed and defensive. I had found the specific thing to say that opened him up rather than shutting him down, and he had gone home and had a conversation with his son that neither of them forgot. His son is now in his 30s. That conversation is still in him. I could see it from the life review vantage point, still moving through his life the way a stone dropped in water continues to move through the water long after the stone has settled. There was a teacher at Jefferson whose name was Carol Bishop. She had been struggling in her 3rd year. New curriculum, difficult class, the particular exhaustion of a good teacher who is wondering whether they are good enough. I had taken her for coffee one afternoon in October of 1997, and I had said something that I do not even fully remember saying. I know it was something about the children in her class who would not remember the curriculum, but would remember that she had been present. I know I said that presence is the whole job and the rest is details. Carol Bishop is now the principal of Jefferson Elementary. I did not know this until after I came back and called the school, 25 years later. The thing I said in October of 1997 that I do not fully remember saying is part of why she stayed. Part of why she became the kind of teacher who becomes a principal. Part of why the school she runs now has the particular character it has, which is warm and attentive and specific about each child. In the life review, I saw what those 3 sentences had meant to Jasmine. Not just in that moment, but forward through her life. I saw her as a teenager in a moment of crisis. Remember, you are safe. You can always find a safe room. I saw her as an adult sitting with her own daughter in a difficult moment, using the same words because they had become part of how she understood comfort. Words I had said in 1989 were still moving through the world in 2022. I could not breathe. I mean that literally. I was not breathing. My heart was stopped. But the emotional response was the response of someone who has been shown something they could not have imagined. I saw this pattern repeated across 30 years. A teacher I had supported through a particularly difficult year, who had stayed in teaching because of the conversation we had in the parking lot after school. A child who had been bullied, who remembered that someone had taken it seriously and had grown up to take it seriously himself. Parents who had felt seen in my office and had carried that seeing into the way they raised their children. None of these people knew what they were carrying. I had not known what I was giving. The connection had been invisible from inside the ordinary day, which is why I had felt invisible. But from the vantage point of the life review, it was anything but invisible. It was a web. It was specific and intricate and ongoing, threads of influence and care that had moved outward from each small act and continued moving long after the original moment. My husband Robert appeared. He was himself. I am not going to try to describe what he looked like, because I would be describing him. And if you have lost a spouse, you will understand that there is no describing the specific weight of recognition when you see them again. He was Robert. He was whole. He was completely, effortlessly himself, without the worry lines of his last years, and without the guardedness that had built up from a lifetime of being a brown man in an America that had not always been kind about that. He said, "Lou, do you see it? Do you see that you were never invisible?" I had not known that that was the thing I needed to hear, but it was exactly the thing I needed to hear. He showed me something specific, a moment I had not witnessed and could not have witnessed. He showed me Rosa, my granddaughter, who was 8 years old at the time, coming home from a session with me. She had been having trouble at school, social trouble, the ordinary cruelty of 3rd grade, and I had talked with her about kindness as a practice, not a feeling. Rosa had come home and gone directly to her room and written in her journal, "Grandma Lou says you do not have to feel kind to act kind. You can choose it. Then the feeling follows." I had not known she was writing any of it down. From the other side, I saw that this is the truth of ordinary life. We are more connected to each other than we can see. Every act of care, every moment of showing up, every small true thing we say to another person, it does not evaporate. It travels. It lands somewhere, and it becomes something that travels further. The loneliness is a limitation of perception. not a reflection of reality. I came back to the smell of asphalt and engine oil, and the voices of the first responders, and someone was saying my name in the specific loud, flat tone that means, "Can you hear me? Are you there? Come back." I was there. I came back. The recovery was long. I had 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a fractured pelvis. I was in the hospital for 11 days and in rehabilitation for 6 weeks. My daughter Elena drove down from Santa Fe and stayed with me for the first month home. She is 40 years old and she is a nurse, which meant she took my recovery seriously in a way that I might not have taken it seriously myself. Elena drove me to my first follow-up appointment 6 weeks after the accident. On the way, we passed Jefferson Elementary. I asked her to slow down. I looked at the building, the yellow brick, the playground where I had done supervision duty on autumn mornings for 30 years, the front entrance where I had greeted families during open house nights. I thought about Jasmine, whose words I had helped become part of her. I thought about Carol Bishop, who was now in the principal's office where I had never been a principal, but had always felt like one in the ways that mattered. I thought about Robert, who had seen me on the other side and said, "Do you see that you were never invisible?" Looking at Jefferson Elementary on a Wednesday morning in December, from the passenger seat of my daughter's car, I saw it. For the first time in 30 years of walking through those doors, I fully saw it. The threads I had laid, the things still moving, all of it still there, still real, still spreading outward in directions I could not follow from here. I said to Elena, "I want to go in." She said, "You're on crutches, Mom." I said, "I know. I still want to go in." We went in. The secretary at the front desk, a young woman who had been there for 3 years and remembered me from my last year of work, looked up and her face did something that told me everything about what presence means. She said, "Mrs. Lou, you came back." I said, "I was never gone." I told Elena about the life review in the hospital on the 3rd day, when I was clear-headed enough to find sentences. I told her about Robert. I told her about Jasmine, who I could not name because of professional ethics, but whose story I could tell with the names changed. I told her about Rosa's journal. Elena called Rosa. Rosa was 10 by then. Elena said, "Grandma wants to know if you have a journal." There was a pause, and then Rosa said, in the very specific voice of a child who thinks she might be in trouble, "Why?" Elena said, "Grandma just wants to know if anything she told you ended up in it." There was a longer pause. Then Rosa said, "A lot of stuff. I have been home from the hospital for over a year and a half. My pelvis healed. My ribs healed. I walk with a slight limp that the physical therapist says may be permanent, which I accept cheerfully because I am walking. I attend Rosa's soccer games. I see my grandchildren on the weekends. I sit on my porch in the evenings and watch the Sandia Mountains turn pink at sunset, which they do reliably and magnificently. And I feel like a person who has been given a gift she did not earn. I want to tell you what I learned in 7 minutes and 3 seconds on the other side, because I think it is something many of us are not being told loudly enough. My son Carlos, named for his grandfather, my father's father, who came from Sonora to Albuquerque in 1941. Carlos came from Albuquerque to be with me during my first week home from rehabilitation. He is 44 years old, and he is an engineer. and he processes things the way engineers process things, systematically, after gathering sufficient data. He sat with me in my living room and listened to everything I had to say. And then he asked me 3 specific questions. First question, do you think this was real, or do you think your brain manufactured it under extreme stress? I said, I think it was real. I cannot prove that, but I was there, and the quality of it was different from any experience I have had under duress, including some genuinely extreme duress in my counseling career. Second question, does knowing this change how you are going to live? I said, it changes the thing I was carrying, the loneliness. It is gone. Third question, and this one surprised me. Does it change how you think about Dad? I said, it does. Your father is not where I thought he was. He is somewhere that I have visited, that I can confirm is real, and he is well. He is himself at his best, and he is not lost. Carlos nodded. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he said, okay, good. That was Carlos's eulogy. Okay, good. I understood it completely. You are not invisible. The care you offer to your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, the stranger in the grocery store you smiled at without thinking, none of it is invisible. None of it evaporates. Every act of genuine care goes somewhere. It lands, and it grows, and it travels further than you can follow it from here. The loneliness that comes from feeling like your actions do not matter, like your presence does not register, like the love you give disappears into the air. That loneliness is based on a limitation of perspective, not on the truth. The truth, which I have seen from the vantage point of the life review, is a web of connections so dense and so intricate that the word invisible seems almost laughable in retrospect. You are woven into more lives than you will ever know. The things you said to the people you loved, even the imperfect things, the things you said wrong, the things you wish you could say again, they are still moving through the world. They are in the way your children speak to your grandchildren. They are in the way someone you may have forgotten carries herself through a difficult day. We are never truly alone. That is not a comfort I offer you as a retired school counselor. That is a report I am making as someone who has seen the actual structure of things from a position that most people do not get to occupy while they are still alive. If this has given you something today, if it has loosened something that has been tight for a long time about your own visibility or the people you have loved and lost, please share it with someone else who might need to hear it. The link is right below this video. My husband Robert spent 34 years as a quietly gentle presence in the lives of everyone he knew. He did not make speeches. He did not seek recognition. He was simply consistently there, reliable and warm and specific in the way he paid attention. From the other side, that presence was luminous. Everything he gave, every quiet Tuesday, every small, true kindness, it was all there, visible and whole, and still traveling. He is still traveling. So are all of us. So is everyone you have ever loved. We are never separate from each other for very long. And the love that felt lost when the body stopped, it did not stop. It does not stop. It is the one thing that never stops.